Today we're going to be learning about similes and metaphors. So there are two examples on the screen. Try and have a think and see if you can work out which one is a simile and which is a metaphor, and we'll work out the answer as we go through the PowerPoint. So similes and metaphors share some common things. They're both devices that we use in our literacy work that serve to create imagery, vivid imagery in our literary text. What that means is they create mental pictures when people are reading things that we have written. They're both used to make comparisons, but in a slightly different way. And they often connect two items which might not otherwise be connected together. So we've got life is a roller coaster and life is like a roller coaster. It's the same ones we saw earlier. So let's look at what a simile is. A simile is a figure of speech that compares two things, which shows similarities between them. So for example, she felt as warm as toast, or the boy ran like the wind. A simile is a direct comparison which compares these two things and generally always has the word like or as. Now there are a few exceptions, but most of the time if the word like or as is in it, it is probably a simile because it's comparing, it's saying it's something is like another thing. Metaphors, on the other hand, do the same thing. They also compare objects. However, rather than saying something is like something else, it says something is something else. So, for example, the exam was a walk in the park. Now, the exam was not literally for you to go and take a walk in the park and that was what you were getting graded on. But what do you think it's telling you about the exam? So because a walk in the park is quite a relaxed situation, it's saying that the exam was quite easy, quite chill, wasn't too difficult, but it's a much more interesting way of saying it was easy than just saying the exam was easy. So you can see how these would be really good for up-leveling our writing. So let's look at the two that we saw earlier. What are metaphors? So the metaphor compares life with a roller coaster. So life is a roller coaster would be a metaphor because life isn't literally a roller coaster ride. Like you don't start a roller coaster ride and then you die when it's over, but it's comparing it to a roller coaster because it's saying life has got ups and downs. Some bits are scary, some bits are more relaxed. It gets the sort of message across in a way that tells people about, life is all ups and downs, rather than just saying life can be different. It adds a little bit of imagery into our brains. So here's a little tip to show us the difference between similes and metaphors. So the first one is life is a highway. So life is a highway is a metaphor. The words like or as are not used. So it's saying life is literally a highway. A highway is just the American word for motorway, meaning that it goes on, it twists, it turns, similar to the roller coaster one that we looked at before. And then we've got My Heart is Like an Open Highway from Bon Jovi. So my heart is like an open highway, and in this case it's a simile, and we know this because the word like is used. It's not saying that the heart is an open highway, it's saying it's similar to the open highway. So similar to, simile. So this simile is from The Highwayman, which is a poem you've probably looked at before, and it said the hours crawled by like years. So metaphors can be used to describe abstract or unusual ideas. So if I was to say to you the hours crawled by like years, what would I be trying to imply to you? So it would be that time is passing really slowly. Whatever situation I am in, it means that time is passing by really, really, really slowly. The other hand, we might say the hours flew by. Again, they're not literally flying, but we say that to indicate that time is moving quickly because something fun or exciting is happening. Similes and metaphors can make text more interesting and engage the reader. They paint a vivid picture in the mind. When they're used well, you don't even really notice them unless you're looking for them. So you might find that if you are reading a book today, that if you actually look for similes or metaphors, you might start to see quite a few jumping out of the page from you. But when they're used well, you generally don't notice they're there. They just build up a really good picture in your head of what the author is trying to say. So this verse of The Highwayman has a metaphor and two similes in the same verse. So pause me now and try and identify what that metaphor and the two similes are. Okay, so let's have a look at them. We've got his eyes were hollows of madness, his hair like mouldy hay, and then dumb as a dog. So the blue one at the top is a metaphor. So it's saying the eyes were hollows of madness. Hollow meaning like a dip, so like kind of like dark, crazy looking. Now they obviously aren't literally like holes in his face filled with madness. That would be impossible. But it gives you a really good idea of that kind of crazy, crazy eyes that he's got going on. His hair like mouldy hay, so it's comparing his sort of hair to mouldy hay, so that gives you the image that it's quite like straw-like, probably a dirty blonde. It's kind of all over the place, a bit stringy and, you know, kind of greasy. And then finally we've got dumb as a dog, he listened. So dumb meaning silent, as a dog, he listened. Listened like he was quietly, and he heard the robber say. Okay, so a little bit of a challenge for you now. Try and create a simile and a metaphor for happiness. So you could say happiness is, and then finish either with a simile or a metaphor. So pause me now and try and write down a simile and a metaphor for happiness. Great, so I'll give you a couple of examples. Obviously, they probably will not be the same as yours. So you could do happiness is like a box of chocolates. So you know, the box of chocolates, when you open it up, you get that lovely, oh look, there's all these different chocolates. It's a really nice thing. There's all different flavours. Everything's quite nice. So happiness is like a box of chocolates. You could flip that into happiness is a box of chocolates. Or you could say happiness is sunshine in the middle of winter. You know, you could say that, you know, that like it was at the weekend, it was a lovely sunny day, it was cold and crisp, but it was beautifully sunny. So that sort of happiness, that sun shining through the dull winter. And then you could do happiness is sun on a winter day. So you could see how we swap those between similes and metaphors by taking out the word like. All right, so let's move on to our first little task. So you can see I've come outside and I have got the camera focused on some grit which the janitors put out in the playground. Now, what I'd like you to do is try and think of a simile and a metaphor to describe how the grit looks in the cracks in the gravel, okay? You can see it across there, and then as we go further out, you see more grit just kind of sparkling. So pause me and write a simile and a metaphor for the grit. All right, so your next one is the football. So you can see the football just in the distance. All right, so how could you describe that football just there all by itself, no children outside to play with it? Describe what the football looks like using a simile and then a metaphor as well. So that's your next one, so you can pause me there, write those down. Next one we're going to look at is the water on top of the bench. So you can see it here is water rather than ice. There's a wee bit of ice in it though. So you're talking about the pattern, so I'll do an example. The water sat on top of the bench like a giraffe's spots. So you can see the similarities between that. And then the giraffe spots of water sat on top of the bench. So you can see I swapped it into a metaphor by saying it was the same as the giraffe spots. Next one's a little bit harder to see. You can see that it's just the whiteboard on top of the bench. But as I zoom in, you can see the way the ice has formed these kind of little points on the table. So I'll just move them so you can see it's like little crystals of ice, but they've kind of grown up the way there. So this is quite a good one you can come up with a simile or a metaphor for. What does this look similar to from above? Okay. Think of maybe something you might see in the woods if the trees were covered in snow or ice. So see if you can come up with a simile and a metaphor for these little icicle things. So hopefully you can hear that noise as I crunch across the ice. So what could you say as a simile and a metaphor for how I'm crunching across that ice? What does the sound like? Try and describe it using a simile and a metaphor. Just before I go for our final thing we're going to do simile and metaphor out, I thought you'd like to see this. You can see that all of your bird food is gone. So obviously I think there were more around here. There's the string. Obviously the birds have enjoyed your bird food, keeping them nice and healthy over the cold winter that we've had since we've been off school. So that's a really nice thing to see. Final simile and metaphor is going to be about these twigs. Now, what do they look like? Are they thick? Are they thin? Try and come up with a simile and a metaphor to describe them. So that's your final one. Now I'm back inside in the warm. I've got your next task for you. Hopefully you were all able to write similes and metaphors for the things that I showed you outside. And can you post those in the comments if you've managed that? Now what I would like you to do is go outside into your own garden. Make sure you've obviously got permission to be going out, or you could look out the window if you don't have a garden, you're not able to go out. And I would like you to write down at least 3 similes and 3 metaphors of your own. And what you're going to do when you've got these is you're going to use these in a paragraph to describe your view in your garden, outside, wherever it is that you've chosen to write your similes and metaphors about. Now, like I said, the best similes and metaphors you don't necessarily notice unless you're looking for them. So if you just write a paragraph that's literally just 3 similes and 3 metaphors, of course you're going to notice it's just a list of statements. What you need to do is build that paragraph up with other VCOP, other different openers, and try and integrate or put in those similes and metaphors in a way that seems natural and adds to the writing rather than just being a list of similes and metaphors. So I want you to write your paragraph. It can be quite a long paragraph, lots of description. Think of your other VCOP as well, but you're trying to include 3 similes and 3 metaphors as naturally as you can. Now, when we were outside, we were writing the similes and metaphors about the same thing. I don't think that's probably appropriate for this piece of writing, because if you were to use a metaphor about, for example, the grass and then a simile about the grass straight after, it would seem a bit strange, unless you make them really quite different. So try and maybe do 3 metaphors about something and then 3 similes about something else, you know, like 6 different things for your 3. Once you've written your paragraph, you're going to submit it on the assignment. Please don't post that in the comments. You can post your video ones in the comments, but please post your paragraph into the assignment. I'll put the document up for you. You can take a photo, you can type on the document that's there, or you can upload a document, whatever way is easiest, but please make sure you do it on there, because that way I'm able to give you individual feedback and identify anything to help you improve as well.